beautiful architecture that we have come to now. I'm not even sure if beautiful is the right word, but it's sort of much more elegant than I think it was in the past, and it really drives, I think, our the way we think about future architecture and the way we think about addressing just like sort of systemic issues in the warehouse software, and just like some of the like thornier, like how do we do with multiple warehouses is like the classic one that people have been talking about since I've joined, because we are always thinking about like, well, at some point it's going to make sense to open a new warehouse on the West Coast, and I think that thinking about this problem using these two data sets, I think it's an interesting way to like approach this specific problem, but it's giving me a lot of thought to like how I've looked at other, like solving business problems using technology at other companies, and how it takes such a long time to get to that point where you like have this like deep understanding of what the core problem is. So the actual technical details of what we're doing are, we're using the RabbitMQ Java client, which is, I think, in my opinion, a little bit low level. It's like the details of like connecting, publishing, and handling that connection. As an application developer is not, it's interesting as a developer, but as an application developer, it's like, in my opinion, a little bit low level. And so, at Rent the Runway, we use something called Conduit, which is an open source kind of layer on top of this that we've authored, and has its like abstractions that are not always the right ones, but I think it's a really crucial component to our architecture in terms of making it easier for application developers at Rent the Runway who are really interested in solving business problems to like use RabbitMQ and not really have to worry about some of the lower level details. We use, the messages themselves are Java classes serialized to JSON using Jackson. That's like not that controversial or even interesting. I think one of the more interesting things about from the Drop Wizard perspective is, as someone who I never used Drop Wizard before coming to Rent the Runway, is that we use we have lots of these web services that have HTTP sort of RESTful-ish endpoints for interacting with them, and the Drop Wizard pattern is to have this client project that you, as a consumer of the API, can just grab, and it's in your Java project now, and you can just call these methods. We do that with the RabbitMQ component as well. So if I'm a user of, say, the inventory service and I want to I want to know about changes to inventory data, the inventory authors have implemented the client in such a way that I can just grab that and start listening to messages and not really have to worry about the details of RabbitMQ or the messages or anything like that. And packaging that up in the client, both the HTTP aspect and the RabbitMQ aspect, I think it's like a really smart move on the Drop Wizard, sort of like the frameworks setting the standards for like how to set up these services and really think about the API you're providing to your clients, who might just be other developers at your company. This is just basically the same thing I was talking about. So the service is your backend web service, the client is this HTTP client, and we have these RabbitMQ listeners. And standardly, you have the API sort of project that has the domain classes, including the messages and whatever related classes you might need to. Your listener is going to get a message object that's an instance of some class, and whatever details you need for that. And I really like this. I think it's like a really really elegant way of setting things up. Two other Drop Wizard related things are using Drop Wizard managed objects to manage the lifecycle of the listener itself. This isn't something I've actually done. I read about managed objects, and I think it's probably a perfect use case for this. I think the managed object is a perfect. I think the RabbitMQ listeners is a perfect use case for the managed object. I don't know if you've used them before, Carlo, but
yeah, but basically it ties into the Jetty lifecycle. So you have like a start and stop, and so like if you send a kill signal to the process, it has like a period to do a graceful shutdown, and so like the Jetty server will then try to gracefully shut down anything that's managed. And so you give it some time, and then at some point it says, okay, after you've enough time to try to clean up, now I'm just going to kill 9.
Yeah, so this is something I've been wanting to look into for the RabbitMQ listeners in particular. The health checks is something we do use for some of our services with connections to RabbitMQ, is to just have so if you're not familiar with health checks in Drop Wizard, it's just sort of a standard thing that the framework provides where it has an endpoint on the admin port where if you I think you hit it with a GET request, it'll just run the health checks you've provided, which are just, some of them are testing database connectivity. I think there's some JVM-based ones that look for threads that are deadlocked. And you can implement your own that like do any, whatever business code you want to do to make sure your app is healthy. And then you can use that for your own debugging purposes or use it in a load balancer to see if the app should stay in the pool or something like that. We have a couple of apps that have health checks, specifically the RabbitMQ connection. I think we haven't gotten quite so far as to implement that as part of our shared library coding. That would be like a great like default health check for, I don't know if it makes sense to be packaged with Dropwizard, but sort of a thing that you could implement such that all your apps that are listening by whatever queue you happen to have chosen. It's really not a RabbitMQ specific thing. So this is just a little sketch, if you're not super familiar with Dropwizard, where the components are lying in terms of just like give everyone, people who maybe aren't super familiar with Dropwizard, the way this, an application that is both accepting incoming HTTP requests, listening and publishing to queues, and I threw a database in there because probably that's at least some state that you're updating or something like that. So this blue square is the actual Dropwizard JVM process, and so the stuff external to that is not in that process, in that the back-end web service process. Dropwizard gives you Jersey, of course, and so you implement these resource classes that are, that give you the routing for your RESTful HTTP endpoints. And so in this particular sort of made-up example, we have incoming HTTP traffic from somewhere. It could be web requests. In our case, it's always other services. And then there's this purple box here, which is just this RabbitMQ client. And like I was saying, it's usually, in our cases, these clients pulled in from other services that are specifically listening to and publishing to specific queue, like sort of domain-specific queues with their domain-specific domain-specific messages. And so here, this sort of is the idea here being like we have two RabbitMQ, a queue and an exchange, and so again this is sort of RabbitMQ specific stuff. As you publish to exchanges and you listen to queues. The point of the diagram is mostly just that the requests are coming in, some of which are updating state in the database, some of which might need to then publish that change, whatever change was happening, to downstream consumers by RabbitMQ. But the service is also listening to RabbitMQ and updating state as necessary. So what's going on under the hood, again, from an application developer's perspective, isn't so necessary until things go wrong, but effectively you have HTTP is being handled by the Dropwizard framework and, like I said, Jenny server. So there's a pool of HTTP threads handling that, and there's a separate thread that's doing the publishing and consuming from RabbitMQ. And so I think the most interesting thing in my experience at Rent the Runway regarding message queues is the experience we had over the past 6 months to a year when we implemented when the company implemented a couple of new features. And I just wanted to highlight two of them. These were things that the warehouse team effectively did not have to do any work for. And I think we would have had to done a lot more work had we not been using queues. So Blingbot's one of them. Justin over here worked on Blingbot. The idea is, so there's this product on the website where it's a sort of a feature on the website where after you check out, you're given this option to, for $15, get a sort of curated bonus accessory. And we call this internally mystery bling. I don't think it's actually branded that way on the website. It's kind of a weird thing. But the idea is sort of that it's a win-win for RTR and for the customer, because the customer is getting an accessory for maybe cheaper than they would have had to rent it normally, and it's a win for RTR because we're getting a little extra money, obviously, and we're using inventory that was otherwise not being rented. The way this was handled by the warehouse was literally in the morning, one of the staff members would go through the UI, and I think he would just filter on this particular style, which represented the mystery bling sort of product that had been added to the order, and then turn this into a Google Doc, turn this result of the filter to a Google Doc, give it to our stylist, who would then go through, look at the customer's other items, and then like pick something appropriate. Send that back to the warehouse, who would manually go through and add these new items to the order, or maybe it was the status of the added items. Anyway, the point being is that there was a lot of really manual work that was being done, and I think it was maybe like one person in the warehouse and like a few stylists would have to handle it. But there are people who have like, they're handling much more important things. Like these are people who have been working for Rent-A-Right for a long time, understand either the warehouse process or the customer service needs, and should really be like we should be using their time more effectively. So Justin and some other people on his team came up with this idea. I think it's because you worked on some of the recommendation stuff, right? Or your team is sort of responsible for some of the recommendation stuff. Came up with this idea that we could really just fulfill these orders automatically using the recommendation engine. And so the way they ended up implementing it was to listen to one of the warehouse queues that has details on when reservations are changing with regards to the fulfillment process. And they would basically learn when the reason we were doing the queue is to wait until the last possible minute. Or sorry, the reason we were doing this manual thing was to wait until the last possible minute. And the queues allowed BlingBot, which was what they came up with, a really great, I don't know who's responsible for that, but a really great name for this software was to wait until the reservation was about to be fulfilled, because we didn't want to block inventory that might have been selected by customers. So we would wait until the last possible minute for them to do the manual process, and now the software could do the same thing by waiting until effectively there's a window in which a few days in which a reservation is the item is going to be shipped out for a reservation, because we want to obviously try and utilize our inventory as much as possible. And so they would wait until this happened, which would be a couple days, maybe a day or two before the item was going to be shipped out, and then they could just do that swap automatically by listening to this queue. And like I said, it was almost no work for our team. I think it would be the same amount of work for this other team to implement this if we didn't have queues, but it would have been a lot more work for us to figure out how to notify them. Even because maybe we would have just added another